It is a tremendous honor to have the opportunity to speak before the convention of this great and historic union. So I thank you very sincerely for that. It's customary when giving a talk like this one to start with a couple of jokes to win the audience over, get them on your side. But there's nothing funny about what's happening in the United States today. And we're already on the same side, which is the side of working people. So no jokes today, just the truth. And the truth is that the United States of America, a country that has given me a wonderful life, has lost its way. One night after I'd moderated a program on Afghanistan at the Kennedy Library in Boston, a World War II veteran, a man in his 80s, came up to me, and speaking generally about the state of affairs in the United States, he asked plaintively, "What happened to us?" His tone and weathered face conveyed a sense of real loss. He'd known a different America, having worked as an engineer and raised a family in the Midwest in the post-war period, when the United States, despite many severe problems, showed every sign that it was really getting its act together. I know something about that era, having grown up in the 50s and 60s in a suburban town in New Jersey. Jobs were plentiful. More and more young people were going to college and their education was affordable. Americans by the tens of millions were moving into the economic mainstream. I look around now and I have to ask, like that veteran in Boston, what the hell happened to us? We've become a nation that pours trillions of dollars into wars that never end, while at the same time demolishing school budgets, closing public libraries, throwing teachers, firefighters, police officers, and other essential public employees out of work, and generally letting the bottom fall out of the quality of life. We ship our goods overseas and then look around and wonder why so many people are unemployed. What's the matter with us? We make trade agreements with foreign countries that hobble American workers and hurt their families. And then we don't even require those foreign countries to abide by the rules of those agreements. We let them cheat and our workers take it on the chin. There's something wrong with that. What is the matter with us? You know, there was a little controversy last week over whether Michelle Bachmann looked crazy on the cover of Newsweek magazine. I'll tell you the truth. I think all of our so-called political leaders look crazy nearly all of the time. We've got a gigantic employment crisis in this country, but are they dealing with it? No. All they know how to do is launch these dopey attacks against one another. They act like kids in a food fight at a frat party. If they were little children, we'd give them a timeout. We'd send them to the corner. This is not just shameful, it's tragic. These are our leaders we're talking about. We've got 25 million people who can't find full-time work in the United States. 25 million. And that's from the official statistics. We know the reality is much worse. 6 million manufacturing jobs, 1/3 of the entire sector, good jobs, disappeared from 2000 to 2010. Another 2 million construction jobs were destroyed when the housing market crashed and burned in the second half of the decade. I'm writing a book called Wounded Colossus, and I'll tell you right now, the most grievous of all of America's wounds is its chronic, insidious unemployment. We haven't seen anything like this since the Great Depression. Consider our young people. They're staring at a very bleak future, a future in which they will be less well off than their elders. Their generation will be less well off than our generation is. There's something wrong with that, and that cold fact should send a shudder through all of us. It goes to the heart and soul of the American dream. The American dream, as we've known it, is on life support. Huge numbers of men and women in their 20s and 30s, including many with college degrees, are moving back home with mom and dad, postponing their entry into a job market that mocks the dreams of the young. Our leaders in Washington are behaving as if they are totally unaware of this awful state of affairs. Actually, I have to say that President Obama is worried about employment, but of course the job that he's trying to save is his own. There are two main points that I would like to emphatically convey here. The first is that we do not have a debt crisis in this country. We have an employment crisis. We are not creating anything close to enough jobs for those Americans who want and desperately need to work. And the human toll of this crisis is profound. I'm including in my book the story of a man from Columbus, Ohio, Ron Harper, who had been a branch manager earning $64,000 a year at a GE subsidiary. I felt my job was secure, he told me. But GE decided that this was a business it was no longer interested in having as part of its portfolio, and it decided to downsize the operation in a way that would make it attractive to a buyer. We've heard of that before. Mr. Harper, 32 years old, married, and the father of a 4-year-old, was fired. He tried desperately to find work, even at much lower pay, but he could not. When I applied for lower paid work, he said, if I got any response at all, it was only to tell me that I was overqualified. The Harper standard of living deteriorated drastically. Bills piled up. They didn't know from one day to the next if the lights in their house would still be on. There were times when they didn't know where the next meal would be coming from. Absolute bottom was hit on those days when Mr. Harper, without even enough cash to buy groceries, felt compelled to go to downtown Columbus to give blood in return for the $50 that each donor was paid. Normally, you should eat before you do that, he said, but I couldn't always. If you don't eat, you can get dizzy. And there were times when I'd have to wait a little bit before I could leave to make sure that I was okay to drive home. We've lost our way. You shouldn't have to give blood to put food on the table for your family, not in the United States of America. When the GPS systems in our car get disoriented, the voice sometimes says, recalculating. That's what we need to do. We need to recalculate. We need to reorient ourselves because we have really lost our way. Ron Harper is hardly alone. 7 million fewer people are employed now than at the beginning of the Great Recession in December 2007. When you consider that the working age population grew by 4 million during those years, you get a sense of the scope of the disaster. At least 11 million new jobs are needed right now just to get us back to where things were at the tail end of the George W. Bush administration, which was hardly employment nirvana. At the current rate of job creation, assuming no setbacks at all, we won't get there until sometime in the 2020s. The average length of unemployment is now close to a backbreaking 6 months. A third of the 14 million men and women officially classified as unemployed have been out of work for more than a year. This is not just a crisis for the unemployed, it's a crisis for all of us. Consumer spending accounts for 70% of the output of the American economy. Deprive too many of those consumers of gainful employment, which we've done, and you'll end up with a catastrophe on your hands, which is what we've got. Workers have got to earn enough money to make the purchases that keep this consumer economy going. This was once widely understood. Henry Ford understood it, FDR understood it, FDR said, "This nation cannot endure if it is half boom and half broke." In other words, without jobs, we're dead. And you cannot revive the American economy without putting Americans back to work. We've got to have those jobs. And I've got a message for all those deficit hawks out there. I say to those deficit hawks, I don't care how many vital services you cut. You can cut Social Security, you can cut Medicare, you can cut the programs that keep our food safe and our water clean. You can cut until every last proverbial cow comes home, but you cannot bring the deficits under control if Americans are not working and paying taxes. We need those jobs. We need jobs in this country. The second point I want to emphasize is the answer to that World War II veterans question, what happened to us? I'll tell you what happened to us. The United States is in terrible trouble right now because we turned our backs on working people. We betrayed the people who really matter. It's not the bankers who try to bleed us for every red cent, who rip us off by charging 25% interest on our credit cards while paying just 1% on our savings. Those aren't the ones who matter. It's not the CEOs who build up their bonuses by sending decent people to the unemployment line. Those are not the ones who matter. The people who matter are the men and women of America who go to work each day and raise their families and try to pay their bills and send their children to college, and who don't spend all of their time trying to figure out how to take advantage of other people. These are the folks who matter. People like the men and women of this great union. People whose work each day builds the bridges and the highways and the schoolhouses of America. People who teach and look after our children. People who take care of the sick and the infirm and write the books we read and come running whenever there is an emergency. These are the people who matter in America, and these are the people we've betrayed by our policies that favor only the very wealthy, and by our craven political leadership that talks a good game about the middle class, but dances always to the tune of their corporate masters. Things have to change in this country. This has to stop. We need jobs, and we need to put Americans back to work. We bailed out the banks. We bailed out the banks and the financial institutions that caused this terrible crisis, but we haven't done squat for the men and women who have lost their jobs, or for the families facing foreclosure, or the ones with homes that are underwater, with mortgage balances higher than their homes are worth.